Christmas Eve morning, my son told me he had no place for me in his new family. He dropped me at the bus station with a single suitcase and drove away without looking back. I thought that was the end, but it was only the beginning of something neither of us could have imagined. The cold hit my face like a slap when I stepped outside the bus station. It was that kind of cold that goes through you, the kind that penetrates your clothes and settles into your bones, the kind that makes your breath look like white smoke and your fingers start to ache within minutes. I pulled my coat tighter around myself. The old wool coat I had owned for nearly 20 years, the one with the slightly frayed hem at the bottom and the button missing on the left side that I never quite got around to sewing back on properly. It was a coat that had seen better days, but it had always kept me warm. My son Michael had dropped me off here at the city bus station at 9 o'clock in the morning, telling me to figure it out myself. Figure it out. Those were his exact words, said with such coldness in his voice that it seemed to match the temperature around me. I had called him 3 weeks earlier to ask if I could spend Christmas with him and his new wife, Emma. It was supposed to be simple, supposed to be a normal request from a mother to her son. I had nothing else going on. I had retired from nursing 2 years ago, and my life had become quite small. Christmas with Michael seemed like the perfect reason to do something special. But Emma said no. She was the reason I was here, freezing on the street corner with nowhere to go and nobody to call. Emma had convinced Michael, probably over many dinners and quiet conversations in bed, that his mother was too much of a burden, that my presence would complicate things between them, that it was time he grew up and cut his ties to the past. And Michael, who I had raised alone after his father died when he was just 5 years old, Michael, who I had worked double shifts to put through college, who I had supported through his first business failure when he lost everything. Michael simply agreed with her, without even having the courtesy to explain why or how he had come to this decision. I found myself walking without any real destination, just moving, because staying still seemed like the kind of thing that might kill you when it was this cold. The streets were decorated with tinsel and lights, multicolored and twinkling, and every single storefront window was filled with happy families, with children opening presents, with scenes of warmth and togetherness that felt like they were mocking me personally. I could see into the windows of restaurants where people sat together eating Christmas dinner, their faces illuminated by candlelight and champagne. I could see into homes where grandparents and children gathered around trees. I could see everything I didn't have, everything I had lost in the span of a few hours. I had no hotel, no reservation, no money for one anyway. My entire savings were thin and meager after I retired from my nursing job 2 years ago. And I had spent most of what little I had accumulated on Michael's new home when he and Emma first bought it. I had given them money for the down payment. I had helped them furnish the living room. These were gifts they accepted without real gratitude and never mentioned again, as if I had just been doing what I was supposed to do, what mothers are required to do. The bus station had concrete benches outside on the sidewalk, and I found one in a spot where the wind was slightly less brutal, pressed against the building's facade. I sat there with my suitcase beside me, watching the people rush past with their shopping bags and their holiday cheer, their sense of purpose and belonging. It was Christmas Eve, the evening of Christmas Eve to be precise, maybe around 6 o'clock when the shops were still open and the streets were still crowded with last-minute shoppers. It was supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year, what they always say, But I was sitting on a bus station bench in the freezing cold with absolutely no place to go and nobody who wanted me. My phone was on 10% battery, and I had already scrolled through Michael's social media once an hour ago, seeing pictures of him and Emma at their company holiday party from the night before. Both of them smiling and glowing. Both of them looking so happy and complete without me. I looked at those pictures for a long time, studying Emma's expression, trying to figure out where the hatred in her eyes for me had come from. I didn't call him again after the first 2 calls that morning. What would I say? I had already tried to explain how much the abandonment hurt, and he had simply told me to stop being dramatic and making everything about myself. That's what he said, almost word for word. Stop making everything about yourself. As if my survival, my well-being, my basic need for shelter on Christmas Eve was somehow selfish, as if my pain was an inconvenience to him. I curled up on the bench as much as I could, trying to make myself smaller, trying to preserve heat by drawing my knees up to my chest and wrapping my coat tight around everything. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. My body was too cold and my mind was too active, replaying the conversation from that morning over and over again. Around midnight, as the crowds thinned and the storefronts closed, I heard someone walking by, heard footsteps approaching, and I didn't even look up. I was too tired, too cold, too numb with disappointment to even raise my head. I had raised Michael alone, from the age of 5 years old, and it wasn't easy in any capacity. His father, Robert, had suffered a massive heart attack one afternoon at work. Just like that, completely out of the blue, gone in an instant. One moment he was at his office, talking to his colleagues about weekend plans, and the next moment his heart simply stopped. I was 32 years old, and suddenly a widow and a single mother with a child who didn't understand why his dad wasn't coming home anymore, who asked me every single night for weeks where Daddy was. When would Daddy come home? For 12 years, I worked as a nurse at the county hospital, pulling night shifts and day shifts, sometimes both in the same week if I could manage it. I was exhausted all the time. My body hurt, but the money was necessary. I missed so many of Michael's school events because I was working. I missed his soccer games in the spring and fall seasons. I missed his piano recitals that he practiced so hard for. But I made sure he had food in his belly at night, food that was warm and nourishing. I made sure he had a safe place to sleep, a clean bed with fresh sheets, a room of his own. I made sure he had clothes on his back, school uniforms that fit him, shoes when he outgrew the ones he had. I did everything right. I was a good mother. I dated a few men over the years. I won't lie about that. But I never let any of them become part of Michael's life in any real way. I didn't want him to feel replaced or confused, or somehow less important than a romantic partner. He was my priority. He was my entire world, and my reason for continuing to get up every single day, even when I was so tired I could barely think straight. When he turned 18 and went to college, I was so proud that I cried. When he graduated and started his career in finance, making good money, becoming successful, I cried happy tears of pride and relief. When he told me at age 32 that he was getting married, I was genuinely thrilled. I bought a new dress for the wedding, something elegant and blue, something that made me feel beautiful for the first time in many years. I got my hair done professionally at a salon instead of cutting it myself in the bathroom mirror like I usually did. I was so looking forward to having a family again, to having Michael's wife become a daughter to me, to maybe someday having grandchildren to spoil and love and teach. I made sacrifices for that dream of family. I worked extra hours whenever they were available. I denied myself things I wanted. I lived simply and saved what I could, every penny, because I wanted to help them get their life started on solid financial ground. The down payment on their house came partially from my money, from the inheritance my mother had left me years ago, money I had saved carefully. The furniture for their living room came from my shopping, from my recommendations and my taste. I wasn't keeping score, or at least I told myself I wasn't. But deep down, maybe I was. Maybe I thought that all those sacrifices would buy me a permanent place in his life, a solid spot at the family table, an unshakable position of importance. Emma changed all that. She was beautiful in a cold, calculated way, and she was ambitious and completely disdainful of me from the moment we met at their engagement party. I could see it in the way she looked at me, looking me up and down, as if I was something outdated, something that needed to be discarded or cleaned. She called me old-fashioned and suggested I was just trying to cling to Michael, to avoid facing my own empty life. She made subtle comments about my career, about the fact that I had only been a nurse, about how limited my worldview was. And Michael, instead of defending me, instead of standing up to her and telling her that my life and my choices had been honorable, he just agreed with her. He took her side. He chose her over the woman who had given him everything. Around 3 a.m, I heard footsteps approaching. I almost didn't look up, but something made me. A man was walking past the bus station, and unlike the few others who had passed by, this man looked like he belonged there. He was well dressed in expensive clothes, but he had no coat. His teeth were chattering and his shoulders were trembling, and I could see his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked like he was in trouble. He looked cold enough to be dangerous, cold enough that his life might actually be in danger. I had spent my entire career in nursing, recognizing the signs of hypothermia, and this man was showing them. His movements were becoming sluggish, and his speech, when he muttered something to himself, was slurred. He was lost in the city, with no protection against the elements, and he was running out of time. Without thinking about it, I stood up. I had learned long ago in the hospital that you don't think about things like this. You just act. You respond to need, without calculating the cost to yourself. So, I called out to him. "Excuse me," I said. I said it again when he didn't respond. Louder this time. "Sir, are you all right?" He turned to me, and I could see his confusion. He was going in and out of lucidity, the way people do when they're in extreme conditions. He said something about needing to get somewhere, about a meeting, about a decision he had to make tonight. He wasn't making sense, but he was clearly in danger. I looked at him standing there in that expensive suit, with that hollow, expensive look, shivering in the cold, and I made a decision. I took off my coat, my old wool coat with the missing button, and the frayed hem, the coat I had owned for 20 years, the coat that was keeping me alive in this freezing night. I walked over to him, and I put it around his shoulders. He tried to protest. No, I can't," he said. "You're cold. I'm older than you. I've survived worse than this." That wasn't true, but it sounded good. The truth was, I had nowhere to be warm anyway, and he was in actual medical danger. His lips were turning blue. I wrapped the coat around him, and I held his arm because he seemed unsteady. "What's your name?" I asked. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Rothschild." We talked for a while. He told me he was a businessman, though he didn't seem like he was quite himself. He talked about his company and about a decision he was making about his own family, about whether family was worth the complications it brought, about whether cutting people out was the only way to be happy. He talked like someone who had been drinking, though I didn't smell alcohol on his breath. He seemed like someone making a terrible decision and using the cold to numb himself to the consequences. I thought about Michael. I thought about how easy it would be to become bitter about what he had done to me. I could have pushed Daniel away and let him figure out his own problems. He was a stranger. He was none of my responsibility. But I had spent my life taking care of people, and I couldn't stop doing it just because the world had decided to treat me poorly. Daniel sat with me on that bench for the rest of the night, and we talked the entire time. He talked about his children, 2 adult children who didn't speak to him anymore, because he had been too focused on building his business empire to pay attention to them when they were young and needed him most. He talked about missing their childhoods, about not knowing their friends or their dreams. He said he had been trying to decide whether reaching out to them at this point was worth the humiliation of admitting he had been wrong, of admitting that he had prioritized money and success over the people who loved him. He said it seemed easier to just cut them off completely, to decide they didn't matter anymore, to move forward and build something new without the emotional weight of their resentment. But sitting there talking to me, sitting right next to a woman who had given everything to her son only to be completely abandoned on Christmas Eve, something seemed to shift in him. Something changed in his mind about what matters and what doesn't. Around dawn, as the sky started to lighten to gray and the city began to wake up with the sounds of early morning traffic, he asked me to tell him about my situation in detail. So I did. I told him everything. I told him about Michael, about Emma, about the bus station, about having nowhere to go and no one to call. I told him about my nursing career and my sacrifices. I told him the whole story, from the beginning, from Robert's death to this moment on this bench, and I cried while I was telling it. Something I hadn't allowed myself to do since Michael first told me coldly that he didn't have room for me anymore in his new life. The tears came in waves, silent at first, and then harder, my entire body shaking with the release of weeks of held grief. Daniel listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, without trying to fix it or make me feel better. He just listened. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. The city was becoming more awake around us. Then he said something I didn't understand at the time, something that would later change everything. He said, "You gave me your coat when you had nothing, when you were suffering yourself from the cold. You trusted a stranger and helped him when he was in serious danger. That is worth more than any amount of money. That is the kind of character that I spent my whole life trying to earn with financial success, and I never did. You have it naturally, without trying, without expecting anything in return." The sun started to rise completely, breaking through the clouds, and I was exhausted and frozen and emotionally hollowed out. I didn't expect anything from Daniel. He was just a person I had helped, and I had learned long ago that helping people is its own reward. At least, that's what I told myself to survive the disappointment in my life. But then he stood up slowly, brushing the cold dust off his borrowed coat, and he said something that changed everything. He said, "Don't move from this spot. Stay here. I'm serious." He gave me my coat back, the one I had given him, and it was still warm. He told me his car would be here in exactly 5 minutes. He asked for my full name and my address, my complete address, and I gave it to him because I was too tired to be suspicious, too broken to protect myself. He said, "I'm going to send someone to pick you up. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. I'm going to make sure you're never abandoned like this again." And then he walked away into the morning light, leaving me holding my coat, uncertain whether anything he said was real or whether I had imagined the whole conversation because of the cold and the exhaustion and the emotional devastation of the night. 5 minutes later, a car pulled up. It wasn't a regular car. It was a sleek, expensive black car with tinted windows, the kind of car I had only ever seen in movies. A driver got out and said, "Mrs. Catherine Morrison? Are you Mrs. Morrison?" I nodded, and he said, "Please get in. Mr. Rothschild has arranged for you to be taken to a hotel." I got in the car, and it was warm, so impossibly warm, and there was hot coffee in a thermos and a blanket waiting for me. The car took me to the most expensive hotel in the city, the kind of place I would never have stayed in my entire life. They had a room waiting for me, a suite, and the staff treated me like I was important. They brought me hot food and fresh clothes that somehow fit perfectly, and I showered and I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, there was a phone on the nightstand, and it rang almost immediately. It was Daniel. He said, "I have a proposition for you. I know we've just met, but I believe in trusting instinct. And my instinct tells me you're a person of integrity. I've been thinking about my own children, about the mistakes I made, and I've decided to reach out to them. But I'm also going to reach out to you. I want to hire you, not as an employee, but as a consultant. I want to understand family. I want to understand what I did wrong. I want to fix it. And I can pay you very well for your time and your wisdom." I don't know what I said to that. I think I said yes. I was still half asleep, and I was still processing the fact that this man, this stranger, had somehow orchestrated an entire rescue operation on Christmas Eve. He said, "But first, we're going to visit your son. We're going to have a conversation about choices and consequences." He asked me where Michael lived, and I gave him the address because something in me needed closure, needed my son to see that I was okay, that I wasn't broken by what he had done. 3 hours later, that's when the black Mercedes started arriving. The morning had turned to afternoon, and I was dressed in clothes that fit me properly for the first time in years. Expensive clothes that actually matched and made me look like someone who mattered, someone who was valued. Clothes Daniel had apparently ordered for me while I was sleeping. I was sitting in the lobby of the hotel. Marble floors and crystal chandeliers and the smell of fresh flowers everywhere. When I saw them through the massive windows, black Mercedes vehicles, 3 of them, pulling up to the curb, one after another, with perfect timing. They moved with military precision. Drivers got out in synchronization. Security personnel got out and formed a protective barrier. And then, emerging from the center vehicle, came Daniel Rothschild. And he looked completely different than he had the night before. But he looked different in daylight, different when he was fully present, and in his proper mind, and not half frozen to death on a bus station bench. He looked powerful. He looked like someone who was used to having the world rearrange itself around him. Someone used to getting exactly what he wanted. He walked over to me, and he extended his hand, and his grip was firm, and his eyes were clear and intelligent. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "thank you for last night. Thank you for the kindness you showed me when I had decided to turn my back on my own family forever, when I was ready to just walk away from my own children." I shook his hand, and it was warm and firm and confident. He said, "Now I'm going to show you what I can do. I'm going to show you what it looks like when someone chooses you." He led me outside, and I got in one of the Mercedes, the back seat, and it was like being inside a different world. The interior was like being inside a cloud, so soft, so comfortable, with soft leather seats and soft music playing in perfect temperature control. We drove to Michael's house, the beautiful house I had helped them buy with my savings, the house where I was apparently no longer welcome, where I had been cast out like garbage. When we arrived, there were 3 additional Mercedes already parked outside, making the street look like a corporate motorcade. Daniel got out first, before the driver even opened his door. He walked to the front door, and he didn't knock. He didn't ask permission. He had a key, somehow, and he opened that door like he owned the place. He opened the door, and he walked right in with complete authority. And I followed him, because I didn't know what else to do, because something in this moment felt important, and powerful, and right. Michael was in the living room with Emma. Both of them were sitting on the sofa that I had selected, the sofa I had helped them buy. Michael looked shocked to see me appear in his living room. Shocked, and then something else. Something that looked like shame, but might have been fear. Daniel Rothschild walked directly to my son, and he said, "Let me tell you who you just abandoned on Christmas Eve. Let me tell you exactly what kind of person you threw away, like she didn't matter." He said, "This woman gave me her only coat when she was suffering from the cold. She had absolutely nothing, and she gave the last thing she had to a complete stranger. She raised you alone after your father died. She worked double shifts, multiple jobs, to put you through college. She gave you money for your home. She has spent her entire life thinking of others first, before herself. And you, a man who had everything given to him, everything handed to him, you decided she was inconvenient. You decided that your comfort was more important than her survival." Then Daniel did something that made Hale's face go completely white, made Emma gasp audibly. He pulled out a document, an official-looking document with his name on it. Daniel Rothschild, in large letters. He said, "I'm Daniel Rothschild. You might know that name. You work in finance, so I know you know that name. You know that Rothschild Capital manages $300 billion in assets. You know who I am and what I can do." He held up the document, and he said clearly, "I'm offering your mother a position with my company, a real position, a genuine, legitimate job, doing what she does best, which is caring for people and putting their well-being first. The salary is $200,000 per year. The benefits are comprehensive and extensive. She will have a house of her own, paid for completely by the company. She will have security and health care and everything she needs for the rest of her life, and she won't need you for any of it." Michael tried to say something, tried to object or explain, but Daniel cut him off with a sharp gesture. He said, "You had a choice last night. You chose to protect yourself. You chose to cut off the woman who gave you life. Your mother had a choice too. She had every reason to push me away, to let me freeze to death, to decide that kindness wasn't worth the cost when she was suffering herself. But she chose differently. She chose to be human when it would have been easier not to. And now she's going to live like one." Michael stared at the document, and I could see the exact moment it all became real to him, the moment the words shifted from abstract to concrete. The color drained from his face slowly, like someone was using a dimmer switch on his confidence. His mouth opened and closed, like he was trying to form words, but couldn't quite manage them. Emma, sitting next to him on that sofa I had helped them buy with my own savings, helped select the fabric for, helped arrange in their living room, looked like she might actually faint. She had gone pale under her suntan, and her hand was gripping the armrest with such force that her knuckles were white. Daniel stood there with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from someone who doesn't need to raise their voice to be heard. someone who was used to having the entire world reorganize itself around his words. He said, "I've already made the calls. The paperwork is done. Your mother is no longer dependent on you. No longer hoping for scraps of affection from people who don't deserve her attention or her sacrifice. She has been offered a position as Director of Wellness and Community Relations at Rothschild Capital. She will be reporting directly to me. She will have a team of 12 people working under her, all of them dedicated to helping other people the way she helps people naturally, without expecting anything in return. Her first project will be establishing a foundation that helps elderly people who have been abandoned by their families." The irony in that last statement hung in the air like a knife. Everyone in that room understood exactly what he was saying, without him having to say it directly. He turned to me and he said, "Mrs. Morrison, would you like to accept this offer?" I looked at my son. I studied his face like I was trying to memorize it, trying to understand who this man was that I had raised and loved so fiercely. I looked at Emma with her calculated smile and her obvious fear that her life was about to change. I looked at the house that my money had helped them buy, that my love had helped them establish, and then I said yes. I said it clearly and without hesitation, without doubt, without looking back. Yes, I would like to accept. The words felt like freedom. Michael finally found his voice, and it came out shaky and uncertain. He said, "Mom, this is insane. You're making a huge mistake. You don't know this man. You can't just walk away from your family. How can you do this to me?" But Daniel interrupted him with a sharp gesture that commanded the entire room's attention. "She's not walking away from her family, young man. Her family walked away from her. There's a difference. And she's not making a mistake. She's making a choice, the same choice I'm making. I'm going to reach out to my own children today. I'm going to tell them that I was wrong. I'm going to tell them that I miss their lives and that I regret it more than I can express. And I'm going to ask them if they'll give me a chance to be part of their lives now, not because I can give them anything, but because I want to know them. I want to be their father, not their piggy bank, not their source of financial security, their father." He looked directly at Michael when he said that last part, and I could see Michael wince, as if he had been struck. Michael looked away. Emma reached over and grabbed Michael's arm, and I could see her whispering something urgent to him, probably something calculated to protect her position in this scenario, something designed to make Michael feel like he needed to fix the situation before it spiraled out of control. But there was nothing to fix. The situation had already been fixed. I had been fixed. I walked out of that house without looking back. I didn't even pause at the doorway to absorb one last moment of the life I had been helping them build. I simply opened the door and I walked through it. And when it closed behind me, I heard it click with finality. Daniel's driver was waiting for me by the car, his expression neutral and professional, as if he had been told exactly what would happen and was prepared for it. I got in the car and I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful or any of the emotions I might have expected to feel in that moment. What I felt was something simpler and much more profound. I felt free. I felt like I had been living underwater for my entire life, drowning in the weight of expectations and obligations, and someone had finally given me the chance to come up for air. The air in the car smelled like leather and expensive cologne, and I breathed it in deeply. The hotel suite became my home for the first month while Daniel's people arranged housing for me. And every morning, I would wake up and think, This is real. This is actually happening. They found me a beautiful apartment in a high-rise building with a view of the city that stretched all the way to the horizon, with floor-to-floor windows that let in natural light, with space and air and room to breathe that I had never had before. I would stand at those windows and look out at the city and try to understand how my life had changed so completely in just 48 hours. I started working at Rothschild Capital the week after Christmas, and walking into that office for the first time was like walking into a different universe entirely. The buildings were all glass and steel and innovation and possibility. There were people everywhere, working with purpose and energy, moving through the spaces with intention. And when I introduced myself to my team, the 12 people who would be working under my direction, I realized something essential about myself that I had forgotten or perhaps never known. I knew how to lead people. I knew how to make them feel valued and seen. I had spent 30 years as a nurse doing the same thing, caring for people, showing them that they mattered. And now I was going to do it at a much larger scale, with actual resources and support, in the backing of a major corporation, with real power to make things happen. I threw myself into my work with an intensity that surprised even me. Working long hours, thinking about problems at night, coming up with solutions that actually worked. I designed programs to help employees balance their lives with their work, actual programs that considered childcare and mental health and exhaustion and burnout. I created wellness initiatives that actually worked because they were designed by someone who understood what it meant to sacrifice everything. Someone who understood that burnout doesn't come from working too hard, but from never being appreciated for the work you do. I established the foundation that Daniel had mentioned, the one designed to help elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. And within 6 months, we were serving 300 people. 300 people who suddenly had someone who cared, whether they lived or died. I started dating again. Something I hadn't done in years. Something I had denied myself because I thought my time and my energy were needed elsewhere. There was a man named Robert, a name that matched my late husband's, but in a completely different man. Someone who was nothing like the Robert I had lost. This Robert was present. This Robert was attentive. This Robert actually wanted to spend time with me because he liked me, because he found me interesting and intelligent and beautiful, not because he needed something from me or expected me to sacrifice. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see, but never had the money or the time to visit. I took a cooking class in Italy and a painting class in Paris. I learned to paint landscapes and still life and abstract concepts. I spent money on myself without guilt, without the voice in my head telling me that I was being selfish. I looked in the mirror and I saw a woman who mattered, who had value, who deserved to take up space in the world. I sent Michael a Christmas card that first year, a simple one, just a note saying that I was well and that I hoped he was happy. He never responded, but I knew he had received it because I tracked the delivery. I didn't do it to hurt him. I did it to close a door that had been left hanging open, to make it clear that I wasn't waiting for his forgiveness or his understanding or his return to my life. That chapter was over, and I was finally ready to begin a new one. Michael found out about my new position about 3 months in, through the business journals and trade publications that covered my hiring at Rothschild Capital. Daniel made sure of that. He had someone leak the story to the press in a way that was factual and complimentary, but impossible to ignore. There was my name, my picture, my official title, and a quote from Daniel about how I was one of the most compassionate and capable people he had ever met, how I was going to revolutionize the way that corporations thought about employee wellness. The article described me as a visionary, as someone who had come to the corporate world later in life, but was already making an impact that established executives with decades of experience could only dream of. Michael saw that article the same way his entire office saw it. His colleagues started asking him if that was his mother, this woman whose picture was in the financial section of the paper, this woman who was apparently changing the way major corporations thought about their workers' mental health and well-being. He had to admit that it was. I imagine that was humiliating for him. I imagine his friends were suddenly very interested in meeting his mother, this woman who had gone from being a retired nurse to being a corporate executive at one of the most prestigious firms in the country, all thanks to a billionaire who had a chance encounter with her on Christmas Eve. His wife, Emma, must have been absolutely furious. She had married a successful man, but now she was the wife of a man whose mother had become significantly more successful than he was, more visible, more important, more talked about in the circles they moved in. That dynamic must have been absolutely maddening to her, must have made her feel like the purchase she had made, the investment she had made in Michael, had decreased in value. Michael started calling me about 4 months after I took the job. My new assistant, a young woman named Jessica, who was brilliant and energetic and was one of the products of my hiring practices, one of the people I had brought into the company specifically because she had potential and deserved a chance, told me that someone named Michael Morrison had called for me 3 times in one day. She asked if I wanted her to put him through. I told her to tell him I was in a meeting and that I would call him back, but I never called him back. He called again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. On the 4th day, after the 9th call, I finally took the call. I could hear it in his voice immediately, the desperation, the shifting of power dynamics, the sudden awareness that I was not the person he had thought I was. He said, "Mom, we need to talk." I said, "Michael, we've said everything we need to say." He said, "That's not true. Emma and we've been having problems. We didn't realize what we had with you until you were gone." That's what he said. "We didn't realize what we had with you." As if I was a thing to be had, a possession that decreased in value when it wasn't properly appreciated. Something like an investment that had failed to pay dividends. I said, "Michael, you made a choice. I made a choice. We're both living with our choices now." He said, "I want to see you. I want to apologize in person. I want to fix this. I want my mother back." But I knew something that he didn't understand yet. Some things can't be fixed. Some relationships, once broken in the way ours had been broken, can never be put back together the same way. The cracks are always visible, and the foundation is always compromised. You can patch it up and paint over it and pretend it's new, but it will never be what it was. I agreed to meet him for coffee at a small shop near my office building. I chose the place deliberately, somewhere public, somewhere professional, somewhere that made it clear that this was not a personal reunion, but a transaction, a conversation that needed to happen for closure, somewhere that there would be other people around, so he couldn't try to manipulate me with emotion or silence or the weight of our shared history. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table by the window, looking smaller than I remembered. He had lost weight. He looked like a man who wasn't sleeping well, who wasn't eating properly. He looked haunted. He stood up when he saw me, and he reached out to hug me, but I didn't move forward to meet him halfway. I stayed where I was, and he had to come all the way to me. I accepted the hug, but I didn't hug back. I just stood there with my arms at my sides while he embraced me, and I could feel him trembling. It felt like I was accepting a donation I didn't want. We sat down, and he ordered coffee that he didn't drink. He ordered it, and then just stared at it, pushing the cup around on the saucer, like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. He said, "I've made a terrible mistake." I said, "Yes, you have." He said, "I didn't realize that what you were doing for us was an act of love. I thought it was just what mothers do, what they're supposed to do. I thought your sacrifices were automatic, that they didn't cost you anything, that there was no effort or pain behind them." He paused, and he looked at me with eyes that were wet, and I could see that he was genuinely struggling. And then I read about your new job, and I realized that you could have done all of those things for us out of choice, not out of obligation. You could have chosen not to sacrifice, and you chose to anyway. And I threw that away. I said nothing for a long moment. I let the silence stretch between us. I watched him sit with his discomfort, and then I said, "You threw it away." I didn't throw it away. I was standing outside on Christmas Eve, freezing, with nothing, and I gave my coat to a stranger, because that's who I am. I'm someone who gives, and you saw that as a weakness. You saw it as something to exploit, but it wasn't. It was my strength. It was my character. And when you abandoned me, you didn't hurt my character. You just revealed yours. Michael started to cry then, real tears that ran down his face, and I felt something shift inside me. I felt compassion for him, but I also felt a kind of distance that I knew would never fully close, like I was looking at him through glass. I reached across the table and I took his hand, and I said, "I forgive you, Michael. I forgive you, because holding on to anger is too heavy, and I'm not going to carry that weight anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. We can't. There are too many things that were broken." He said, "I don't want to go back to the way things were. I want to start over. I want to get to know my mother, instead of just accepting her love without question." But I realized then that Michael didn't actually understand what he was asking. Starting over meant he would have to see me as a person, as someone with her own dreams and her own needs and her own right to prioritize herself. And I wasn't sure he was capable of that. I said, "Michael, that's going to take time, a lot of time, and it's going to require you to do something you've never done before. It's going to require you to give. Not money. I don't need your money, but attention, understanding, effort. The kind of effort I've been putting into you your entire life." He said he was willing to try, and I believed him. But I also knew that willingness and ability were not the same thing. I said, "That was a start." We exchanged phone numbers, though I kept the same number he had always had, and I promised to have lunch with him the following month. He asked about my job, about my apartment, about my life, and I gave him short answers, polite answers, the kind of answers you give to someone you've just met at a networking event or a professional conference, because in many ways we had just met. The mother and son we had been before Christmas Eve. That relationship was gone, and we would have to build something new if we were going to have any kind of relationship at all. The resolution came slowly, over the course of the following year, unfolding like a flower that takes time to bloom. Michael did reach out more consistently. He started to understand that I needed more than just his phone calls and his apologies. I needed his presence. We did have those monthly lunches, and they became easier over time. more natural, less fraught with the weight of history. He started asking me about my dreams and my goals, not because he was obligated or felt guilty, but because he was genuinely curious about this woman who was his mother, genuinely interested in knowing who I was when I wasn't defined by my relationship to him. Emma eventually left him, which I had suspected she would, because she couldn't handle the shift in power dynamics in their marriage, couldn't handle being married to a man whose mother had more power and influence and money than he did. Michael seemed almost relieved when that happened. He started taking therapy, real therapy with a trained psychologist, trying to understand the patterns in his life, the way he had learned to take without giving, the way he had been raised to believe that his mother's sacrifices were just automatic responses and not expressions of her love and her choice. He was doing the work, difficult work, the kind of work that doesn't show results immediately, but compounds over time. I respected that. I really did. Daniel and I became close friends. The kind of friends who talk on the phone at night and share our worries and our hopes. He did reach out to his own children, and there was a lot of pain and difficulty in that process, a lot of rejection and distance at first. But there was also healing. He told me that my story, the story of what I had done that night on Christmas Eve, had given him the courage to be vulnerable with them, to admit his failures and his mistakes and his regrets, to ask for forgiveness, knowing he might not receive it, knowing he didn't deserve it necessarily. But he did receive it, eventually, because his children were better people than he had been, and they understood that people can change. Now, he has relationships with his children that are based on genuine affection and not on financial dependence or obligation. His daughter told me once that her father was the kindest man she knew now, the most present and attentive and genuinely interested father. And I knew that that was at least partly because of me, because of what I had taught him through my actions on that freezing night, when I gave my coat to a stranger, when I chose compassion over self-preservation. I'm Catherine Morrison now, 73 years old, and my life is nothing like I thought it would be when I was standing on that bench on Christmas Eve. I have a fulfilling job that matters. I have friendships that are based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I have a man who loves me, who chooses me, who puts effort into our relationship. I have security and comfort, and the knowledge that I earned those things through my character, not through my sacrifices or my willingness to be used by people who didn't appreciate me. My relationship with Michael is better than it ever was, but it's different. It's more honest. We're not playing roles anymore. We're not pretending that unconditional maternal love is supposed to be free of cost, free of expectations, free of basic human decency in return. We're two people who are learning to love each other as adults, with boundaries and honesty and mutual effort. Some of you watching might think that I was too harsh with Michael, that I should have been more forgiving, more willing to jump back into that old dynamic where I gave everything and he gave nothing. Some of you might think that Daniel was a savior, that this was a fairy tale, that it was too perfect to be real. And maybe you're right. Maybe this story is too neat, too resolved, too tidy. But I'm telling you that sometimes the most profound moments in our lives are the ones that force us to recognize our own worth. Sometimes we need to be broken down completely, to be rebuilt as the people we're supposed to be. And sometimes we need to meet someone who sees us clearly, who values us completely, who gives us permission to choose ourselves. That's what Daniel gave me. That's what that night on Christmas Eve gave me. Not a rescue, not a fairy tale, but a moment of clarity. A moment where I realized that my life was mine to live, and I was going to live it fully, without apology, without diminishing myself, to make room for people who didn't deserve my light.